seeing as how both of these movies are getting sequels in the not-too-distant future, and Toho's general reinvigoration of their own kaiju Godzilla production, I think it's a time that we kind of revisit this, and if you think you have seen this video before, yes and no, this is very much a new and different video compared to the previous one, which had to be taken down because YouTube's copyright system is an absolute clown show. And this is not simply a redo of that video, it is a very different video. It is kind of funny though, in the making of this, looking back, how much of a massive shift in my own outlook on Godzilla Minus One has been since I first semi-covered this topic. That being the faithfulness of Toho's big recent Godzillas with respect to the original character that is Godzilla. It's a bit of a weird topic to cover since, as a character, Godzilla's kind of an oddity. He's a concept more than he is a character in the sense of, say, someone like Superman is. He's been, well, quite literally everything from an irradiated sea dinosaur, to a super ancient guardian, to a giant plant, and even an extra-dimensional whatever the frick Ultima is. For our two contenders today, we have Godzilla Minus One, who is mostly patterned in design and origins very heavily after the original, and Shin Godzilla, who is a completely reinvented origin that still leans on the nuclear involvement. This being both a retrospective of both films and a comparative analysis of their respective Godzillas, and sort of a breakdown of what the idea of a faithful version of Godzilla actually is. Because for as fantastic of a movie as the original is, it's one, far from perfect, and second, really no Godzilla has ever actually been completely faithful to it. Even Toho's own more recent to its creation. Meaning that the original is kind of an anomaly in that respect. As for what that original Godzilla is, what we see is some combination between a stumbling monster wrathful at the world at large, and a curious wandering creature in an unfamiliar land. While he is lashing out, it's not really targeted at anything specifically, being humanity. The film actually does a good measure in trying to humanize Godzilla, showing that he's not just all destruction and fire. This is because he's not just a destroyer, he is meant to be a victim just as much as he is the bringer of the apocalypse. As a mutant, he is a very much unwilling monster, and this is played specifically for tragedy. Unfortunately, a lot of this sympathetic quality is actually left out in the film. This is because the theater program, which is what explained this, is simply a pamphlet that was handed out in the Japanese theaters. It is not an actual part of the film proper in terms of what is relayed to us, but it does canonically exist, which is one of my issues with the film. It does not give a complete picture of the character, but they do, at least within the story, have references to this, hoping to portray him as not just a monster, but as something made from humanity's mistakes. Hello everyone, I am Max Allo, your American Allosaurus, and that was a bit of a long-winded introduction to this. Sorry about that. If you haven't done so already, please don't forget to subscribe for more, comment your thoughts below, and leave a like on the video. Now, with our main man or main monster introduced, let's start with Minus Goji. Both since his film was the more recent one, as well as he visually sticks far closer to the original Godzilla's origin. That being, he originally hailed from Odo Island, where he somewhat lived peacefully and in harmony with the local islanders. This is actually something that was supposed to be communicated to us in the actual film itself, but much like the original movie, is not shown. In this case, it is done to Takashi Yamazaki wanting to have filmed these scenes, which are called pickups, basically stuff done after most filming is done and inserted later into production, but was denied by Toho. Thankfully, he actually is the one that wrote the novelization of the film, one of the few times the novelizations are actually canon, because he made both of them himself, that does have these scenes. So while it is canonical, it still is not presented to us. Things like whenever he would surface up from the depths, bringing up all those deep sea fish, the locals would go out, collect them, and use it to make hot pot. It helps establish his characterization in a way that somewhat lines up with his later rampage of the airfield. The hostility he displays is because of unfamiliar things, where, as we are presented, he's simply a hostile and violent creature lashing out at anything and everything. But ultimately his mutation twists and contorts his mind into something else entirely. The dichotomy of him being a curious but again still aggressive creature contrasts with his later psychopathic thirst for blood that he goes on. Once he's changed, he's actually extremely focused and deliberate, shown actively hunting down and sinking both US naval vessels and then later Japanese fishing boats. While, yes, the original 54 version did destroy a ship at the beginning, this is because it more or less wandered into his own territory and he didn't actively seek to destroy them. This extends further into -1's rampage into the cities themselves. He is actively targeting and destroying buildings and crushing humans, going for maximum destruction and terror and relishing the bloodshed he is causing. These are not the acts of a confused animal. These are deliberate psychopathic acts meant to instill fear and suffering in, well, everything that isn't him. Especially given his roar that he delivers after utilizing his atomic breath, he revels in the death and carnage. Another indicator of just how far he has fallen is due to his atomic ray itself. It is so powerful, it actually burns him in the same manner the original nuclear warheads that created him did. He doesn't care about the pain, just wanting to destroy. He displays no curiosity, just wrath. In his final battle, even after being dredged up from the bottom of the ocean, having the barotrauma literally ripping his body apart, he is still fighting, even as the atomic energy he is charging up is leaking out of his body. He is still so blinded with rage, he goes on the attack, which ultimately results in his destruction. Or temporary destruction. Contrast this death with the original Godzilla's death, which everyone mourns both Dr. Serizawa's sacrifice, but also reflects on the tragedy that is Godzilla himself, how he was something created by humanity, and he paid basically for humanity's mistakes. The tragedy is twofold in the destruction brought upon the city, and the unfortunate fate that was Godzilla himself. No such thing is given to Minus Goji. The reason for this lack of reflection is that Minus Goji is a fundamentally different beast than the original was intended to be. Something that is shared with Shin Godzilla, which, rather than a mutant dinosaur-like creature, or even something created by nuclear weapons, Shin is instead born from nuclear waste dumping in Tokyo Bay, still keeping his nuclear core, but his origins are actually hardly ever elaborated on beyond this. While a point I am critical of -1 for is the lack of elaboration on Godzilla's backstory despite there being one, in contrast, Shin Godzilla doesn't have really a backstory. He's not supposed to be a character who is changed and became something new. He's, well, a formless, constantly evolving horror. While presenting him with next to no backstory may seem like a weakness, the movie is actually built around this in such a way that he really doesn't display a personality, making his lack of backstory more or less fundamentally irrelevant. as well as the difference being that he was never intended to have a backstory that was explained. The issue being the prior ones had a backstory which was left out. The closest we really get to a personality, if you could call it that, is his instinctive reactions to outside stimulus, in this case, massive pain-inducing panic. Whenever he mutates from stress, of course this is how the way his body works, adapting to new situations that cause him pain, he panics. Running first as Kamata-kun, then after mutating into his third form, he screams before bolting out into the ocean to cool himself off as his reactor is overheating. And after turning into his fourth form, perfecting his cooling system, he actually doesn't even engage with the military or even human structures as a whole. He's an indifferent, almost force of nature at this point. The only time that he engages with the military after going into this form is when the B2 spirits drop massive bunker busters on him, which tear into his flesh and detonate inside of his body, once more causing him significant pain. This spurs on his development of the atomic ray, which he uses to destroy all the B2s, and bury Tokyo in a sea of flame. But none of this is conscious action, it is simply instinctive reaction to something that causes pain. He actually exhausts himself and has to shut down for several weeks after doing this. Even at the end of the film, when he wakes back up, he displays what could most generously be described as a rudimentary intelligence. He targets the drones with a full-force dorsal spine laser barrage, utilizing his inbuilt phased radar array to detect them, but he's not intelligently deciding what to do, he's just going full throttle. In fact, this ends up biting him in the butt when he burns through all of his nuclear fuel in basically a panic. The only time in the entire film he causes destruction that is not prompted from a reaction of pain is the Sea of Fire he leaves Tokyo, which is after he first obtains the atomic ray and is just unable to control it. After all, much like Michimochi Eevee, there are no thoughts behind those eyes. At best, it could be a simple association of things that fly equal pain. This renders him something of a panicked wanderer, aimlessly going from place to place. This, much like -1, lacks the crucial horror of the original and the tragedy that is of the original. Instead, it focuses far more on the economic effects that Godzilla's destruction leaves on the entirety of Japan. Though it does highlight how this was something that was created by humanity, though it mentions that it was the Americans who dumped the nuclear waste into the bay. So where does this leave these two with respect to faithfulness to the original? -1 captures the look and the letter of what the original is on paper. Things like framing of shots, the manner in which he starts and is mutated, and somewhat of the tone. But his personality, his mannerisms are a far cry from the originals. Again, he is very deliberately hostile to humanity and singularly focused on carnage, where 54 was lashing out in confusion and is more akin to a force of nature with some curiosity. -1 is more or less a straight-up monster, in fact almost something of a caricature of the original Godzilla. His personality bearing far more resemblance to something like King Ghidorah or Destoroyah. The tragic nature of his creation is also either absent or very heavily downplayed to simply the start before being abandoned partway through. Shin, on the other claw, has nothing really to do with the original's origin beyond nuclear involvement. He's a different sort of nuclear accident. His interactions with humans are the complete opposite of -1's. He ignores them. He is almost indifferent to humanity until something simply causes pain to him, and he goes to deal with that source of pain. It's a lack of awareness for any of his surroundings, whereas the original Godzilla actually did display quite an awareness of his surroundings. He was curious of things like the clock tower, flipping over bridges. And much like -1, the tragic aspect of the character really isn't a focus. This renders both of them in a very interesting position because it's hard to compare. They're both splintered fragments. Close, but not quite like the original Godzilla. In kind of a strange way, they're almost two halves of a singular whole that is the original Godzilla. If you take the two of them and you put them together, you actually would get relatively close to the original Godzilla. But there would still be a lot of key differences, since both of them do embody very different aspects of the original to an almost extreme degree. This is actually the way that every single version of Godzilla is. Since again, he is less of a character and more of a concept given a face, none will ever match the original perfectly. And this holds true for every different Godzilla. He is something that is applicable to different scenarios, and those scenarios will inform the way that Godzilla is made. He's more like an RPG character, one where you spec him into different stats and specific traits depending on the needs of the story. Are you going to make him more sympathetic? Go all in like he is with KOTM, or none at all like he is with Ultima? Do you want him to care about humanity? Do you want him to be indifferent to humanity? Him to in some way care about or wish to protect us? Or is it an added benefit of him engaging with something else? Or does he want to completely wipe us out a la GMK? Is his backstory more tragic or less tragic? Was he a mutant or was he just simply always there? That's what makes him Godzilla. It's this combination of traits drawing on various different aspects both from the original and other incarnations. Is a large part of why nothing ever has or ever will be able to perfectly match the original. This sort of spec'd-in nature of Godzilla also reflects the way in which the story... This sort of spec'd-in character nature of Godzilla is also reflective of the nature of the story he is a part of. With the original Godzilla, the movie was specifically about the danger of super weapons, not specifically just nuclear weapons. It's just that nuclear weapons were the only super weapons of the time. It was a cautionary tale of the development of them at all, and the consequences that they and nuclear weapons will incur on the world. That's the reason why the Ocean Destroyer exists. It is a super weapon to cancel out the super weapon that is the atomic bomb, which is embodied of Godzilla, who is also an embodiment of the victims of the atomic bomb. Shin Godzilla was deliberately a call-out to how poorly handled the Fukushima nuclear disaster was by the Japanese government. This is reflected in the story with respect to the film. The overly bureaucratic nature of it, which can cause it to drag on in certain places, is deliberate. It was critical of that exact thing. Seeing as how a earthquake and tsunami caused that nuclear disaster, this is why Godzilla is a more detached character acting as a force of nature humanity can't really do anything about. Then there's -1, which is a bit of an anomaly in we don't really know what the movie is supposed to be about. Various things have been floated around from he is supposed to be some sort of embodiment of divine retribution on Japan for what they did in World War II, which is really not the most likely that he is a corporeal entity, to the two more commonly floated around, but ones that still don't have complete support by the movie itself, which is that he is meant to be simply a vicious weapon. He is a destroyer and always was. something that conflicts with his nature at the start of the movie, with his curiosity and him living with the Odo Islanders. The most likely, and the one that has the most support, is that he is supposed to be an embodiment of the way war changes someone. Considering this is all that the arc Shikishima goes through, I think this is what the intention was in those scenes that would have been filmed on Odo Island, would have gone a great deal in helping this. But sadly, we didn't get those. It's why it leaves Minus Goji on a bit of an unstable footing as to what he is. Beyond simply being something that is very different from what the original Godzilla is supposed to be. So, bringing everything back full circle, who is more faithful? The truth is, really neither. They're both embodiments of different aspects of Godzilla that have been derived. Shin Godzilla starts as a very different concept that edges closer to what the original is in his final formation, and Minus Goji starts off closer to the original, but as he goes, begins to heavily deviate. Once again, this is something that every version of Godzilla shares. I don't think it actually matters which one is the more faithful Godzilla, because unless we get a shot-for-shot, line-for-line remake that also includes everything from the theater program, we will never get a completely faithful Godzilla. Something that no film has ever, and more so, I think ever should, try doing. It is all these different forms, different versions of Godzilla that make the series so interesting. To discuss and debate about each of them respectfully. While we have our favorites, we have our least favorites, Godzilla is always Godzilla. Different aspects reflected from a common source that can all trace their roots back to the original one, no matter how distant they get. Apologies if this video is kind of almost a little inconclusive. It's kind of a weird topic to cover with regards to Godzilla, because he is such a varied character. What one person will say is more faithful is something that someone else may disagree on. There's no, again, empirical way to do it beyond simply shot-for-shot remake. But I want to thank you guys for watching. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments below. Leave a like on the video, and if you haven't done so already, don't forget to subscribe for more. And I will see you guys next week, where we should have the next installment of my Kaiju Stories put up. And then after that, I don't really know what we are going to be doing. I hope to figure that out on the trip to Hololive. But yeah, we are going to the Hololive All for One concert. And I've been Max Allo, and long live the Kaiju King. All of them.